November, President Sir Ramaphosa announced Asanda Luwaca as the new chairperson of the National Youth Development Agency to head a board of 7 members. The new board is expected to carry out the country's efforts to empower young people through skills, employment, work experience and other opportunities. Joining us now to outline plans to reinvigorate the NYDA and give direction to its vision is the new executive chairperson, Asanda Luwaca. Asanda, good evening and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on InFocus. Of course, it was a process that had to be rerun a couple of times and the agency had to stay without a board. But finally, of course, you've been appointed yourself and the deputy chairperson being female, many commending that, saying it's a step in the right direction as far as leadership is concerned. You're coming into an organization that has had 7 consecutive clean audits from the last financial records, or at least final year report. 96% of the targets were met. Are you feeling any pressure?
Thank you for having me on your show this evening. And so one, when we speak about pressure, I think it's just something to mention that, for us as the board that has been recently appointed, we have acknowledged the good work in terms of good governance that has been done by our predecessors. So ultimately, when we speak about issues of what then becomes, the vision of the board, we would want to ideally continue on that, and harnessing, ideals of inculcating, a credible, a capable and inclusive agency that is able to be responsive to the plight of young people.
Yeah. Despite these 7 audits, of course, as you put it, which do indicate a certain degree of competence when it comes to financial records and a degree of governance, but there is this sense from parliamentarians themselves, but from the broader youth cohort as well, that the NYDA needs to review its performance targets to not only be confined to getting clean audits, but let's begin to see real impact on the ground in a way that a bulk of young people in this country are unemployed, and therefore these targets that you set need to speak to that. How are you thinking? What is your thinking in practical terms as you come in around that particular issue?
So I think for us as a board, we are really cognizant to the fact that, when we look at youth unemployment, we have, young people that are at the helm of the unemployment rate. I mean, about 46% of youth of unemployment comprises of young people. So those are huge numbers. And if you look at, the last quarterly survey, you would find that 2 in every 3 young people between, for instance, 18 to 24 are unemployed, So that is massive, and that is definitely something that requires an agency that is able to be agile and that is able to say, number one, it cannot be business as normal. One, given the high levels of unemployment, but secondly, given the fact that all of this has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. So ultimately, when we look at the strategy that the agency and the board that wants to steer and wants to drive across the country, number one, we would look at the issues of economic participation. So for the longest of time, young people have been on the periphery in terms of being active agents in mainstream economy. So when we look at that, we're saying that as young people, we want to ensure that we harness and improve the issues of economic participation through youth entrepreneurship, one. And secondly, we're saying that we want to create decent and sustainable jobs for young people through our initiatives such as our jobs program. 3, we also want to have a scenario where we are able to coordinate and integrate youth development through leveraging on public and private partnership.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more on that in detail. I don't know if you've had a look at the annual report and what your sense is on the numbers, right? The number of youths and persons with disabilities that have benefited, for example, from your non-financial business development intervention. If you look at the previous years, where is that target sitting, and what target have you set for yourself?
So we are currently, we haven't, or rather let me say that we are currently in the process of finalizing our draft APP, which is our annual performance plan. And within that, we will then really zoom in on the various targets. But, the issues of, young people, particularly people with disabilities, have been a priority and have come to the fore, especially in us realizing that this is a group that has been disadvantaged in the past, but also we've got your LGBTQIA plus communities. We've got young people that are predominantly in your rural areas. So when we look at the targets, it's not so much of just having a situation where we are just embarking on a box ticking exercise. But ultimately, when we look and we are assessing the impact, we must be able to say, how have our programs and initiatives ultimately changed the material conditions that young people find themselves in? We must be in a situation where a young person from Mkandule, Eastern Cape, can able to confidently say that an agency of this nature has been able to assist them. A young person from Masesha village in Limpopo can equally find resonance with the agency. Yeah. And when we speak about accessibility, what becomes important for us is also to really speak about the issue of when you speak about accessibility, more often than not, young people or people want to conflate it to a set building, or having a center within a certain district. But when we speak about accessibility, how do we ensure that a young person can access our social media platforms and say, look, as a young person, these are the challenges that I've experienced. Can an agency of this nature be responsive in addressing my challenge as expeditiously as possible? Yeah. Without necessarily physically going to a building to be able to access an NYDA office or the programs.
Yeah, and how do you plan to do that? And it's interesting that you bring that, because these are one of the areas that have been flagged. Your contribution is, in perception, maybe even in fact, largely felt in urban areas, but there is a sense that youth in deep rural South Africa, and especially in informal settlements, are left out, or at least lesser informed about your programs. For example, we had something now around COVID-19 called the Small Enterprise Relief Fund, which had very poor uptake, particularly if you look at rural areas of South Africa. Why is that so, and how can we improve that?
So I think when we look at, just how our society is how we can describe our society is that the COVID-19 pandemic really exposed the disparities between the haves and the have-nots, right? So we found ourselves in a situation where a young person in your urban area was able to really adapt to, the online learning system, because let's say they are able to access Wi-Fi and they're able to access the gadgets, your tablets and laptops and so on and so forth. But then what then happened is that we somehow lost young people that are in your rural area, where even a small issue of accessing connectivity becomes a challenge, right? So as the agency, when we speak about such things, and then ultimately one of our, our strategic outlook as the board that we want to really enforce is this idea of an agile entity. When we speak about agility, how do we then be or get to a point where we are able to fine tune our programs so that they're able to fit a young person that is from a rural area, but without necessarily leaving behind a young person from an urban area. So when we speak about our programs and our initiatives, they should be able to be tailor-made in such a way that we don't leave any young person or have a situation where a young person falls through the cracks as a result of their material conditions. But we are bringing forth all young people, because ultimately our agency does not, it should not preclude any young person, right? So it should be in a situation where each and every young person, irrespective of their economic status or their race, class, gender, or whatever the case may be, should be able to find expression within the programs, and they should not find barriers. So ultimately, we really have a mammoth task ahead of us. But I think what we should then also emphasize is this idea that even as a board, I mean, we have a board that comprises of 7 individuals that come with our various expertise and skill sets, and collectively, I am really confident that we really can take the agency to new heights and really leverage on our various expertise that we bring forward.
All right, we'll talk a little bit further. Stay with us. After the break, we want to talk a little bit more strategically how you plan to address that very same issue that you raised, accessibility. And one of the issues that have been raised with you is you need to improve access to data. It's something that is really, really expensive for young people at this particular point in time. Do stay with us. So we have the new executive chairperson of the NYDA, Asanda Luwaca, with us, and of course taking your views and thoughts tonight on 072-110-5584. Otherwise, you're tweeting us tonight at Newzroom 405. In Focus continues in a moment. Welcome back live with us tonight here on In Focus, and we are in conversation with the incoming executive chairperson of the NYDA on the strategic direction that the agency is taking now in improving its performance and ensuring that that impact is felt deeply on the ground in a pragmatic way, so that young people are incorporated into the economic mainstream of the country. Asanda, thanks for staying on. One of the big issues that I think you're going to have to deal with, and probably something that the agency has been dealing with for a while, is this perception of fairness in the disbursement of grants. Right? There's a question that comes over and over again, that there are certain young people who feel like, for example, if they are not members of the ANC, they are left out and they are not approved for particular benefits and grants that come from the NYDA. Strategically, how do you plan to approach that?
So, the issue of perception is one of the, I guess, the cloud within the agency. But what we ought to really enter or begin a process of is really gaining confidence within not just young people, amongst young people, but society as a whole, to say that number one, the agency seeks to serve all South Africans, irrespective of whatever political affiliations and whatsoever. It is an agency that benefits and should benefit all South Africans. One. So the issues of perception ultimately will begin to die down, as soon or the moment that young people and society can see the footprint of the agency on the ground. I mean, if we just had to cite just, various examples on just some of the good work that has been done. We've got an agency, the NYDA, that has successfully collaborated with, some government entities, one of which that comes to mind is your NHBRC, which is your National Home Builders Registration Council. That's an entity within the Department of Human Settlements. So to date, through such collaborations, we've got an agency that has, in fact, through such collaborative work, we've been able to upskill about 15,000 young people through construction work, with the focus on youth, women, and persons with disabilities, as well as military veterans. So programs like this did not necessarily need someone to be a card-carrying member. But, if you can prove that, one, you're a young person or you fit the criteria, but secondly, that, you've got the capability to execute on or to leverage on these programs, then the NYDA has embarked on such. So the issue of those perceptions, we do note that, they are there, but equally, I think it's cumbersome upon us as the incumbent to really work harder to change those perceptions so that every young person can feel that this agency is an agency that they can ultimately leverage on.
Yeah. But by your own report as the NYDA, during the time of the pandemic, you saw a shift in online engagement when you made access to your website free. Right? It moved from young people accessing the website at midnight, and they began to access it even during the day, which speaks to the question of the affordability of data. So what is your approach to unleashing the digital economy? In practical terms, pragmatic terms, how do you plan to do that?
So I think, when we look at, this issue of data costs, one, we need to be cognizant of the fact that, South Africa has, one of, really high data costs in terms of, the global figures. But, when we embark on such campaigns of reducing the costs and the price of data, what we need to really get into a discussion with is how do we find linkages within, our spheres of government. So you've got your municipal, you've got your provincial governments, and really getting such spheres to commit to investing in broadband so that this issue of accessibility will be easy for all young people, irrespective of those locations.
All right. And so are you going to be, previously we've seen, for example, the NYDA running a campaign around the foregoing this thing of experience. Young people must just be employed. This thing of requiring 3 years experience must go away. How are you going to approach this? Are we going to be seeing you running campaigns on data must fall, which is something, of course, that is not necessarily new in South Africa, but we have seen. But how are you, in practical terms, going to ensure that young people gain access to the digital economy?
So, such number one, what the program that you're citing, is one of the success programs of our predecessors. This issue of scrapping of experience at entry-level posts, So it's something that, one, we can look at, what have been some of the strategies that were employed by our predecessors, one, but secondly, also understanding the terrain that we're in the sense that our mandate ultimately is to mainstream youth development. So what does that involve? It involves building on stakeholder relations and ensuring that we become that credible voice for young people, so that when young people are saying data must fall, then we at a strategic level begin to programmatize what they would have ironed out as a program or a vision that they want to implement. So where we are positioned as the agency, it should serve to be that mouthpiece for young people to be able to harness on or leverage on the position that we're in, but as well as the various stakeholders that we have access to ensure that we are able to really feed back to our constituency and have something tangible that we're able to report on.
Yeah. You spoke earlier out of the integrated approach to youth development that includes public sector, private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders in order to ensure that young people are developed. Now, in a real sense, where you're sitting, I know you sit in the Department of Women, Youth, and People with Disabilities in the presidency. Have you approached other departments and formed some kind of collaborations? What are those departments? I know you've just mentioned now the building sector as one of them in terms of upskilling the youth, but what are those departments and what are those areas where you're seeing growth potential for young people and them joining the economy?
So, I think as if you look at all government departments, or the majority of them, let me say, the issue of young people is a priority. And this is found in, even their targets and the policy position of, for instance, you've got a 30% set aside for youth, women, and, persons with disability. But what may perhaps has been a shortfall is the issue of monitoring the implementation of such policies, right? So what we should then be able to do is through, we've got our democracy or how our state is run is that we've got your three spheres of government. You've got your legislation, you've got your judiciary, and your executive, right? So when you look at just the two spheres, and I'll just emphasize on your legislation and your executive, right? You've got your executive, which ought to implement the policies, but then you've got an oversight body, which is a parliament, in other words, when you speak about legislative parliament. But so what some of the things that the agency should really strengthen is this oversight mechanism through parliament, through institutions such as parliament, through your portfolio committees, where we are able to make sure that a policy position that ought to be implemented from the executive arm of the state finds expression. And when it is not implemented, what then becomes consequence management? So when you speak about that, there really should be an emphasis on us having a footprint in our monitoring and oversight function, right? But over and beyond that, just speaking to maybe just some of the practical collaborations that currently exist. We've got, collaborative programs with your SMU, Department of Small and Medium Enterprises, SMMEs. We've got, collaboration with obviously your basic and higher education. We've got, projects and programs that's dealing with young people that can access agriculture. So it is where we are sitting is that young people can find expression across many, if not most, of government departments. But then it's just this issue of how do we then strengthen this oversight and monitoring function so that we are also able to confidently say where we are sitting that, okay, where there's a department that has a particular target that is meant to focus on young people, that target is met. And when it is not, then we begin to engage that department through the ministry, through, our various instruments, parliament, oversight functions, so that we are not found wanting. Because ultimately, I think we don't want to just be a talk show host, right? I think we leave that to yourselves. As for us, really, it's and this is just one of the highlights or the mandate that we were given is, we want to hit the ground running. So we understand that young people naturally, we are energetic, we're agile, we are innovative. So we really want to hit the ground running and ultimately make that material difference in the lives of young people.
I tell you what, in 100 days, we will touch base with you again to see how far you have gone. I know you're still getting your feet under the table now with a couple of meetings that you've held already, but we'll come back to you and talk to some of the meaty stuff as well that we need to ask you about when you get a handle on how the organization is working. But I appreciate your time and thank you very much for coming through today.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is the incoming executive chairperson of the NYDA, Asanda Luwaca.